Well, hello there, my fine feathered friends, and also Archibald. I'm sure someone out there who could be watching could be named Archibald. I don't know if you are named Archibald, but maybe you should consider a name change. That could be nice, getting a new fun name. But hey, it's Yamina. We're back here again with my Knight of the Blazing Sun. I've leveled her up a little bit, and I'm going to go through part of this public quest here while I talk to you guys about some more backstory stuff for this lady, because I've kind of solidified it a little bit more. And I was going to tell you a little bit about her family and her journey to become a Knight of the Blazing Sun, because that sounded like fun to me. And hopefully some of you guys think that's fun to listen to. We shall see, though. So, our story will start with a jump, but then it will also start with a sword slash, because I don't like this guy. Look at him. He's raiding and he's burning things, and I'm not into it. I'm not into it, brother. Let me tell you, brother. But okay, so the story starts out with a lady named Fatima in Araby. So basically, she was a very renowned. Wait, let me start that over again. I already messing it up. Okay, so the lady named Fatima, born in Araby, and she was kind of a child prodigy. She could pick up pretty much any subject really, really quickly, but especially magic. She showed a great aptitude for magic. So she got inducted to a little order of sorcerers. For a while, she was top of her class and, exceeding basically everybody else. One of the top sorcerers took her under their wing as his apprentice, and she was doing awesome possum. The problem was that honestly, she was kind of accelerating. She was excelling to such a point that she was going past even her teachers. She started to get to a point where she just couldn't learn very much from them, and instead would wander out into the deserts to learn more devious or interesting magic from jinn out in the deserts. She would spend long nights and long days wandering around, speaking with the desert spirits, making deals and trades with them to learn more, figuring out things about, like, for instance, how she could get them to come to her side, how she could bind some of the more unruly ones to items and objects and things like that, and how she could basically become the best mage ever. That was her intention anyway. Unfortunately for her, she did happen to get in over her head. By this point, she had long stopped attending the lectures of her sorceress master, but was still in many ways considered his apprentice. But she wanted to prove that she was ready to be taught the best magic he knew, the highest magic, because he had still been reluctant to teach her more because she was so young. So, once she had learned all the spells he was willing to teach her, she thought she could convince him to teach her greater magic by capturing a very powerful djinn and then bringing it to him. Well, she kind of ended up getting in over her head. She found a djinn as well as a whole little group of djinn, and she started a magical duel with them. Her intention was to capture them and bring them back to her master. Well, the problem was that she was outmatched. Simply put, just a ton of pure magical creatures attacking her at once. She could only fend off one of them at a time, and she kept getting wounded. Eventually, she managed to break off and beat a couple of the djinn and managed to snatch them away. But she used this and used one of the djinn basically to charge a spell, turning it into pure magical energy that she then used to basically make a big explosion and to get the hell out of there. It worked. The other djinns were stunned at least long enough for her to escape. She had two with her, but it cost her quite a bit. One of the djinn had managed to hit her in her left eye, and now she was blind in that eye. Her hair was partially singed, she had quite a few cuts and bruises, and was losing blood. She managed to get back to her master. They scolded her, told her that she shouldn't have gone in so far above her head. However, they still recognized that she was rather powerful for having taken two djinn and pretty much putting them into a small cup that she could use to summon them, to have them change liquid into all kinds of other strange things. Not the most useful, but still something that is in a way very impressive. Seeing that he couldn't really prevent her from going out to the desert again, and that she was going to just keep fighting, he decided to teach her more impressive magic on the condition that she would stay for at least another couple of years with him before she went out into the world. Now, she was 21 years old and decided to go out and challenge the Jinn again. This time, she managed to beat them. Using the most powerful sorceries at her hand, she managed to beat the lesser Jinn, but also to beat the great Jinn that had wounded her so severely in her eye and all that. She took this Jinn, who was incredibly powerful, and she converted all of his power into a single magic item. It was a ring. This ring she had basically crafted with the alchemical knowledge she had learned to essentially extend her lifespan. However, because of the Jinn being so powerful, rather than simply doing that, it actually would make it so that she could be reborn if she died while wearing the ring. This would essentially make her functionally immortal, provided that the ring was never lost from her. So, she kept it on her, and spent the next, about 300 years, traveling all over the place. She went to Albion, she went all over Araby, she went to Cathay, she went to the Northern Wastes briefly. She saw the sheer amount of chaos energy there, thought she might be able to control it, but was smart enough now to at least take more precautions and found that it didn't work. So when she realized that she wouldn't be able to control it, she just kind of left it alone. But anyway, she traveled all over the place, and even to the Empire. And she learned how to hone her craft and how to take magic from various other places and incorporate it into her own workings. She became very powerful. However, she also, died a couple of times because she kept having this tendency to get in over her head. For instance, when she was traveling in the Chaos Waste, yeah, she may have left the bigger amount of energy and all the crazy chaos energy alone, but she still insisted on challenging multiple chaos mages at once. She did surprisingly well, killed 3 of them, but the 4th one managed to take her out. Unfortunately for him, before he could claim his trophy from her body, well, she burst into flames and came back to life and killed him. He did not know that could happen, so he was very surprised. She was becoming more and more powerful, but at a certain point, she actually ended up hitting a plateau. She had accumulated a decent amount of money over her travels, but it seemed like she had gotten to a point where her magical prowess could only get so much better. She kept trying to learn new spells, and since she had the age to do it, she could learn new spells, but she never really felt like she was gaining in power. So she kind of switched her interest. She had certainly established a couple of small businesses and things like that, who were fairly successful in places like Araby, and even one off the coast of Albion, where they were trading with the more primitive tribes. But she never really put all of her eggs into the basket of being a businesswoman. For the next 20 years, she would do just that, using the knowledge she accumulated, the magic she had accumulated, etc., to gain quite a bit of wealth. She also gained quite a bit of prestige and started traveling back and forth between the nations, establishing smaller businesses that she could call upon, as well as a larger business in which she would train young mages to fight in various different armies, and nobles and other people would pay her to tutor. Wait, isn't there another part of this quest? I thought there was. Oh, I ran out of the area. I'm dumb. Basically, she was making a lot of money doing that. She's making connections in Araby. She also started to make connections in Telia and Estelia. And she also became well known in Astilia so that she could negotiate trade pacts between Araby merchants and the Astalians. Claim the Skull Taker. Okay, where? Oh, I think I need to go further in, like around there, maybe. Basically, she was making quite a name for herself. At a certain point, she got to a level where she could pretty much retire and have money for the rest of her life and just spend however long she wanted just traveling around, learning new things if she still felt like trying it. And also, you know, she thought maybe she had time to start a family. She had spent hundreds of years just running around, occasionally having little romantic side quests, if you will, with the various men and occasionally women she traveled with. Never anything very serious, though. Then she met Enrico. This was when she was actually traveling back into the Empire. Enrico Vitale was a inventor from Telia. He had left his homeland because, simply put, there just wasn't very much for him. His mother and father had died in an orc raid. He was a young man, about 25, and he had, simply put, no real reason he decided to stick around in Telia. Cheer. I think he's gonna be like around here somewhere. He was maybe not the most brilliant, but he did have a lot of talent for inventing, for science, and for mathematics and so on. He very quickly... Oh, she's also higher than she needs to be for this area. Cool. That made that real easy. Not that it wasn't going to be pretty easy to begin with, but, you know. Ooh. I always like getting the shoulder pads. Maybe I should just complete it again to get the full influence. We really only covered one shoulder, but that's fine. We're wearing the same uniform. Anyway. They met. Enrico managed to charm Fatima. And, well, they just kind of fell in love. Actual love at first sight. Fatima, despite being now close to 350 years old, had never really experienced this. And she decided that she would go along with him. She funded his new experiments, his new inventions. She got him connections into Engineers Guild and things like that. And it was a very happy marriage. Well, once they got married, actually, because he ended up proposing to her on top of a giant cogwheel. He thought it was a smart thing to do for various weird engineer reasons. He's a little weird, but, you know, nice guy. And Fatima just thought it was cute. So they agreed, got married, and now they still live together and they kind of travel back and forth all across the land. She made another ring for him after going back into the desert and managing to find a djinn of very similar power. So that ring worked very well. He never really died very often just because he was mostly just inventing. Fatima was also kind of gone past her adventuring days, other than occasionally going into the desert to speak with some djinn and or capture others. Then, over the next few years, well, more than a few actually, they had 6 kids. I will tell you just a little bit about these kids because, well, I might actually give them their own videos later on if I'm really into this, and I am pretty into this. I don't know, it's fun to me. But I am not going in any particular order of like birth or anything like that. I'm just going to go in the order of their names that I had written down here. So Evelina. Evelina is actually one of the youngest. Actually, no, she is the youngest. She is an incredibly brilliant scholar. Takes after her mother in that regard. She mostly just spends her time trying to learn from other people. Eventually, though, she encountered a group of dwarves and managed to talk her way, after years of helping out this engineer, nearly 3 decades of doing it, she managed to talk them into letting her just visit an engineer's guild hall. He thought that he was a surprisingly liberal dwarf in the sense that he didn't really think that they needed to keep all their stuff secret, and that maybe teaching the humans about it would actually be better for them because they could help more in combat and stuff like that. The engineers that he brought her to basically gave her absolutely no secrets, treated her like she was very suspicious and like she was going to steal all their secrets, and that was about the sum total of it. She was incredibly disappointed and has since kind of... She's not necessarily against the dwarves, mind you, but she has kind of held a little bit of a grudge against them ever since. But not to worry. She ended up traveling to Cathay, where she learned a bit more, and now she has a job in the imperial bureaucracy of Cathay, where she occasionally sends back exotic spices and manages one of the smaller businesses that the family has. Oh, by the way, the family is all named Vitale. That's their last name now. Because, you know, Enrico Vitale and Fatima took on his name. So the Vitale family has a couple of businesses in Cathay, although they are arguably some of the least profitable ones just because of the distance they have to travel for things. And yeah, they can use magic to make it faster, but it's not really economical to do so. Evelina is also really short. She's only 4'11", and she has very large glasses, and despite having some of her mother's talents for learning, she has some of the worst eyesight out of any of them, and she's nearly blind as a bat without her glasses. But she's skillful enough with a bit of magic, although she is nowhere near Fatima's natural inclination to magic. She's much more interested in just learning and is kind of enjoying living off the family's money to get all kinds of fun travel things and to go to places like Nippon nearby, and occasionally Ind, and to learn about places like that. But she's not really much of an adventurer. She just likes to learn things and grow her library. We also have Grazia. Grazia is a very different person than Evelina. She is much more of a stereotypical adventurer. Oh, also, I almost nearly forgot. Evelina does not have a ring. She was given a ring, however, unfortunately, after she died and came back the first time, it absolutely ruined her vision. So now she doesn't use the ring. Instead, she just uses a bit of magic to extend her life and does not wear the ring because she's afraid that each time she comes back, it's only going to get worse. It turns out that Fatima can remake or make more rings, but she's not actually that skilled at it, and she's having a harder and harder time finding Jinn of the right power level that aren't also too powerful. That basically means that there's probably going to cause, for sure, some sort of mutation. So that ring is now just sits in the Vitale vault. But yeah, Grazia is a stereotypical swordswoman. She's kind of like a Three Musketeer type character. She loves fighting. She loves dueling. She's also very good with a pistol. She's very good with her rapier. And she has traveled all over Estalia and Albion, or like around the coast of Albion. She's fought dark elves. She's fought all kinds of other things. And she's kind of... Some of the other family members think she's a little crazy because she's always inviting danger. But she also doesn't have a ring anymore. Well... Oh. She did have a ring, however, it just didn't really seem to work very well. When she was first slain because of her kind of crazy out there lifestyle, at first she didn't get reborn. And the family ended up having to mourn her, and they thought that the ring had simply not worked, but they left the ring with her and buried her. A month later, she actually managed to get up out of the family's mausoleum, coughing, you know, having seen flowers because their mother was constantly visiting her and all that stuff. And before too long, she was let out because their mother came to visit again. But now she doesn't really trust the ring. She thinks that if she dies, she gets the impression that it's just going to be longer and longer. She occasionally wears the ring, but she just doesn't really know if it's worth it, because she also says that spending that time dead was kind of not great. She kind of learned that she was a bit of a sinner and had probably killed much more people than she should have, and it was not necessarily the greatest time in the afterlife for her. She had kind of mended her ways, but she's still, you know, kind of a rapscallion and, you know, still a bit of a crazy adventurer, but she's toned it down a little bit. She wears the ring occasionally just if the situation she thinks is going to get really deadly. But instead of relying strictly on the ring, she's gotten much better as a swordswoman, as well as just with her pistols. She's an excellent warrior, and she's also learned much more when to not actually engage in the fight. Like, if she thinks for sure that she's gonna die, she'll wear the ring. But for the most part, she's managed to avoid dying again, and she's now way less reckless. She's still an adventurer, and she still relies on her family to give her money. She also occasionally takes her time in her private life under a different name, actually multiple different names, to write love poems and nice little adventure stories, and to help fund her lifestyle that way. However, she's also become a little bit more faithful and very often visits shrines of Myrmidia, you know, kind of like the ones that her sister protected as a Knight of the Blazing Sun. But, you know, she's still kind of crazy and still likes to adventure and still likes to, Shattered Canine Tooth. Delicious tooth. And she still probably pushes the boundaries more than she should. Then we have Giovanni. Giovanni had a similar situation to his sister, but instead of coming back later, he came back very quickly, but he found that the djinn that was in the ring was gone and had actually started to possess him and was starting to try and take control over him. He was getting into increasingly worse and worse situations. He occasionally, you know, previously he had occasionally accompanied his sister, Gracia, on her adventures, but now he was just finding it more and more worrisome. He was afraid that if he died again, he would simply be completely possessed by this djinn that he was hearing all the time and having a very hard time fighting against. Eventually, he got to the point where he was just so tired of it. He couldn't really stand it anymore, and he was worried that the djinn was going to win out. What he ended up doing was going into a Temple of Sigmar in Altdorf. Actually, I'm sorry, I said Altdorf. It was actually in Everheim. He went to the Temple of Sigmar in Everheim, and basically he gave a huge offering, and he just prayed. He prayed more sincerely than he thought anyone had ever prayed in their lives. He got on his knees and he begged Sigmar to remove this djinn from him, to make him whole again, and to make it so that he could live a normal life. He promised not to go, drinking and cavorting as he had previously, and if Sigmar would relieve him of his burden, he promised that he would basically join the priesthood and dedicate his entire life to Sigmar. Well, lo and behold, despite having been a thief in the past, a drunkard, constantly calling people to duels, traveling with his crazy sister, etc., Sigmar answered his prayer, and with the help of a priest of Sigmar, the djinn was banished. He was exorcised of this spirit, and he managed to... Actually, I should probably go to this one first and then come back around, shouldn't I? And he managed to be saved. He gave up the ring, he sent it back to the family, and he dedicated himself to Sigmar. He immediately became an initiate of Sigmar, he shaved his head, and he began doing his damnedest to learn everything about the Sigmarite cult, learn everything about the various different kinds of cults, to learn everything about the life of Sigmar, etc. He wanted to become a true Sigmarite. He contacted Khadija, who we'll talk about shortly, and said basically that he wanted to take the money that he had. Oh, I use it. Take the money he had in the family businesses and donate just about all of it to the Temple of Sigmar. Khadija obliged, since he didn't actually have that much of a stake in the company. But she also set up a small fund for him so that he could, if he needed to travel or something, he could have a little bit of a pension that he could draw upon from the family. Since then, he's been a very dedicated Sigmarite priest. He no longer trusts the ring to try and save him, and instead, he is very much into the idea of giving his entire life to Sigmar. His name is still Giovanni, although he did briefly consider changing it to something possibly more Sigmarite, because that's basically a Tillian name. But still, he occasionally will visit the family and is always trying to preach the good word of Sigmar. He's made it so that several of his other family members will occasionally get like boxes of pamphlets about how great Sigmar is, for instance. And I personally... Ooh, a lesser loot bag. That's interesting. Why would it be lesser? Oh, I don't think any of that's going to be good. So, what we'll do? We'll just get the war tokens. Cool. He's still welcome in the family, although he's probably the most dedicated to Sigmar, and he's the most dedicated now to trying to fight demons and things like that. Then we have Jardan. Jardan was born, and much like his mother, he had some innate magical power. He spent his years in Araby learning how to channel magic, how to get better at using spells, etc., etc. He was not as daring as other members of his family, and instead tended to focus on just mastering it. He was attracted very specifically to the lore of fire, the bright wizard lore. I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, I think it's just the bright wind, the wind of bright magic. Anyway, he was interested in fire magic, basically. Very interested in it. He was not terribly worried about the ring, although after his brother was briefly possessed, he grew a bit more worried about using the ring, but his brother then found Sigmar, and he decided that he would still trust it, because he thought he was even better willed than some Sigmar botherer, essentially. But he was younger. Unfortunately for him, he ended up getting caught in the Badlands on a caravan that his family owned, and he was killed in combat. He came back, and at first seemed pretty normal. The problem was that he had always been interested in fire, but now his fire interest was going maybe a little bit crazy. He really seemed to just like setting things on fire. He really seemed to like learning new fire magic that he could immediately practice out and use in destructive ways. This actually ended up getting him killed again when he set Telian Tavern on fire, and one of the patrons in his because Yardan had been drinking a lot at the time, wasn't really paying as much attention, and one of the patrons shot him. He fell down, died, and when he came back, now he was even more obsessed with fire. Everything in his life became about fire. He was constantly thinking about fire. Essentially, every time he died, he became more of a pyromaniac. The family was worried about him. Yamina and Khadija both implored him to go to the School of Magic in Altdorf and to try to learn to control himself. After he had nearly set another tavern on fire, he decided that it might be a good idea. So he went back, he went to Altdorf and started to learn and train. He's now he's a wizard in the Bright Order and very talented. However, his pyromania has never really left him. And yeah, a lot of wizards in the Bright Order have a little bit of pyromania. His pyromania can get very bad if he doesn't control it. He basically has a constant desire to set things on fire. And even in the calmest of situations, he's always just about ready to explode into a fiery fury. His hair and beard have also turned a bright red, and he is just kind of on the edge of becoming full-on insano dad. He's still around and still fairly popular in the Bright Order, but everybody kind of knows that he's a little insane. Now, we'll get to the last person before Yamina. This is Khadija. Khadija is brilliant. She's incredibly intelligent. She's a great tactician and a great leader of men and women in battle. She's learned, after leading troops again and again, how to lead them, where to lead them, etc., and how to win battles. She's also very adept at negotiating terms and treaties. She's managed to make it so that the caravans and ships and trade ships and all that stuff that their family owns remain relatively unmolested in pretty much any of the lands. She's the one who hires most of the mercenaries, but she's also the one who has done the most in one of their side businesses. And it's not really a side business, it's more like a way to try and improve the world. Essentially, what the Fatali family does is that because they're from Araby, and Fatima, their mother, knew so many people in Araby, she also happened to know some former slave traders and slave traders. She, during her travels, had found that she distasted and disliked slavery and thought it was a moral evil. Khadija agrees with her. However, she has an interesting way of utilizing it. She has decided that because the family has become so wealthy, it's actually worth it to buy large groups of slaves and then bring them back to their family holdings, in Albion, or, well, actually they only have one hold in Albion, but like mostly in the Empire and Telia and Northern Araby, and to immediately free them, to tell them that they can go wherever they want and give them provisions if they would like, or that they can work for the family. Khadija has used this to increase the amount of soldiers and workers that the family has so that they can build big projects in certain areas and also save people from lives of slavery. Some people simply work for a little bit for them, take on a contract for a number of years where they'll learn some skills. Maybe if they want since a lot of them are Arabians who are enslaved, or, you know, Estalians who have been enslaved. Maybe if they want to go to the Empire, they'll teach them how to speak Reichspiel, and they'll teach them some things they'll need to know in the Empire. And after they go for a few years, they can either take a new job with the family in the Empire, or they can just get on one of the family ships and go. They've managed to free a large amount of slaves by doing this, and they're always trying to find ways to undermine the slave trade. Khadija in particular is very passionate about this. Fatima thinks that, of course, slavery is evil, but she doesn't really think that you can completely stop the Arabian slave trade. Khadija begs to differ and thinks that there are ways that they can undermine them. And in fact, they have been undermining them. For instance, they have, in some slave markets, people who will constantly find ways to increase the bid or to ruin auctions, or find ways to make it so that slavery is not as profitable as it otherwise would be. There's also secret night raids on certain slavers who are particularly brutal, so that they can release as many slaves as possible. This has led to Khadija employing basically a small band of criminals who are already negatively viewed in the eyes of Arabian law to do some of this for her, and she pays them underhandedly. Basically making it so that they can't be traced back to her, and finding all kinds of ways to pay them that makes it so that they can't immediately rat her out to the higher authorities. She's also a bit of an engineer. Similar to her father before her, she likes to invent. Although she's nowhere near as good at it as her father, she still has made the family proud with some small inventions and some interesting devices, like a grenade-launching blunderbuss, which, of course, already existed in the Empire, but she made some modifications to it to make it a little bit more interesting, such as firing 3 grenades at once, or firing them longer range, or attaching them to a musket so that you could fire the grenade launcher and then use it as a regular musket. Some interesting ideas. She is very popular, and she is now basically the head of the family business. Fatima is all but completely retired with her husband, and they visit various different estates that they own, traveling around and stuff like that. Khadija is the one who keeps the business going, and she's also moved the head of the business into the Empire in Averland. Well, okay, the head of the business is actually in Altdorf. See, I've done that. I've switched the names back and forth for some reason. In Altdorf is like kind of where the head of the business is, although a lot of the larger offices in places like Araby and Tilia probably still do more trade. She runs the most of it from Altdorf because she's kind of grown to like a lot of things about the Empire. She's always bringing in experts from various different races, like high elves and dwarves and, Estalians, Telians, Arabians, Empire guys, Bretonnians, all over the place. And she still leads them in battle. She also happens to have one of the only rings that actually works. She's died several times and has come back normal each time, usually leading heroic charges to try and save people and things like that. Although she's now more cautious, she's experienced death several times and is not afraid of it. She managed to get one of the few working rings. To be fair, this has also sparked a little bit of jealousy among some of the other family members because she appears to get a lot of attention from their parents. She runs the business. She's very popular. She's being courted by a very, very handsome man who, of course, they all think she's going to go with, but she's actually much more interested in a young engineer. Either way, some of the other family members are kind of jealous of her, but they also rely on her because she's managed to grow the business and increase their wealth quite a bit. She also manages most of their finances so that they don't really have to worry about it. She's very close with Yamina, and she's also pretty close with Evelyn. Or, I'm sorry, Evelina. Grazia really has very little interest in the family other than occasionally paying off some of her debts. Giovanni is in his own Sigmarite world where he occasionally asks her to consider simply fully embracing Sigmar, but also asks her for donations to the temple. And of course, Yardan is probably the most jealous because he thinks that if he had the ring that she had, maybe he wouldn't have gone quite so nuts to the point where he now has the constant worry about, basically becoming a living bomb. And then finally, we have Yamina proper. Yamina, this lady right here, is fully embracing the people of the Empire. She worships the god Myrmidia, and from a young age, she was very interested in the idea of protecting the innocent, saving people from danger, and also from the depravity of some of the nobles of the Empire. She saw from an early time traveling with her sister Khadija how depraved some of the nobles of the Empire were, but how there were also great examples of people who seemed like they were very willing to try and help and protect and nurture their people, as well as good commanders and generals. She ended up becoming dedicated to Myrmidia after she prayed at one of her altars and got a vision of herself in tall, shining armor. Oh, there must be another person here. In tall, shining black armor, charging into a horde of orcs. So, she took the vision to heart, decided that she would ask Khadija's permission to help her fund some knight training so that she could then apply to go become a member of the Knights of the Blazing Sun. She ended up doing very well at this, and now she's adventuring and making a name for herself as a young knight who's traveling by herself. She is still technically part of the order, but the thing that she almost immediately noticed was that the knights were often used as tools to oppress the little people. So she is still technically part of the order and takes a great deal of pride in being part of the order, but is kind of off doing her own thing. She's traveling around, training, learning from dwarves and elves and men and all kinds of things to try and understand where she fits in to the greater picture and how she can better serve Myrmidia and how she can better serve the people of the Empire. She's also a very skilled swordswoman. She's a very skilled knight. And she certainly has a bit of dislike for nobles and things like that in general. But she hopes to try and bring some of them to a better example and to try and help them out. And to try and teach them, right from wrong, essentially. Because she finds that a lot of nobles are basically just like big, very rich children. However, she's also doing a great job and is participating in the war effort, slaying chaos peoples, and all kinds of other things while adventuring around the Empire as technically a Knight of the Blazing Sun, but also a Knight of the family and, of the people of the Empire. So that's it. That's a basic summary of Yamina and her family. I had a lot of fun discussing all this stuff with you guys, and hopefully you found the stories and the people interesting. If at some point I could get good at drawing, or maybe even pay somebody else to draw them, I would actually have them draw these characters, and maybe I would write a little bit more about them out there, and a little bit more detail about their lives. Yamina, for instance, has traveled all across the Empire. She's also been to Albion briefly, and she's also fought in Araby briefly, all kinds of places. She's a really neat person. I think she's great. I think all the family is pretty interesting in their own way, even though one of them is a psycho fireball man, and then, another one of them is a crazy lady with guns. And you know another one of them is a lady who's basically blind. Oh, also Yamina has one of the only other working rings. However, she's never had to use it. She's never died yet. She just knows that she has a working ring because she actually got the ring from her mother because her mother decided that she needed the ring in her new line of work. Her mother now basically just maintains her life longer through magic and things like that as opposed to the ring. She's a very powerful mage. However, that doesn't mean that she's immortal, and she does kind of wonder if, you know, for instance, she's made some trouble for the Skaven and others in the past. She does kind of wonder if they're ever going to try to assassinate her. But we'll see. We'll see. Time will tell. Anyway, I hope you're all having a great day, and I hope you enjoyed my stories. And I hope that you all get your own family members who are fun. And I hope that if you did change your name to Archibald, that's working out for you. Thanks. Bye-bye.